Did you know something new is invented every 10 minutes? Join us as we speak to the innovators reinventing our world here on planet Earth and far, far beyond. Welcome to GTWN Now, a podcast brought to you by the Global Telecom Women's Network and sponsored by CMS Global. GTWN Now introduces the movers and the makers at the cutting edge of technology who are committed to keeping us all connected. In each episode, we invite a leading expert to share her experience building life-changing inventions in places and spaces that don't yet exist, and the inspiration they must muster to tackle the impossible. We also ask our guests to share tips, tools, and strategies to reach your own moonshot. I'm your host, Rosali Gitau, founder of Bixi, FinTech for Women, and Global Telecom Women's Network International Board Member. Welcome to GTWN Now. Today's episode will be hosted by Victoria Hernandez Valcarcel, GTWN's President for Europe and a globally recognized business executive, independent board member, and lecturer with a distinguished career in telecommunications, finance, and corporate governance. Her work spans corporate strategy, investments, and ethics in technology, making her a key voice in shaping a human-centered digital future. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome, everybody, to the GTWN podcast series. And today we are approaching a topic. We are going to treat a topic, a very special one, which is the law as digital conscience, guiding ethical innovation. And for that, we have here with us Chris Watson. Many thanks again, Chris, to be here with us. Chris is a highly respected expert in technology, communications, and competition law with over 30 years of experience in the UK and France international. He's the chair of the Management Board for Technology, Media, and Communications Sector Group at CMS, where he leads a prominent team working on digital infrastructure, funding, and regulatory challenges in telecom and technology industries. Chris is recognized globally as a leading lawyer. He has been listed in the Legal 500 Hall of Fame and Who is Who legal thought leaders, highlighting his influence in shaping communications law. His expertise spans digital transformation, cross-border regulatory issues, and evolving business models on telecom operators. He's particularly passionate about the ethical and legal dimensions of digital identity and the transition from physical to digital rights. Chris is known not only for his legal acumen, but also for his ability to foster cross-cultural collaboration in international legal practice. So welcome, Chris, and many thanks again to be here with us for this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I will start shot fire.
Okay.
How should responsibility for digital innovation be distributed among developers, corporations, governments, and society at large?
That's probably the most complicated, difficult question of all. I think it is an easier thing to say, what are the obligations and the rights of the individuals involved? And I think that I prefer to approach that question from a rights-based position, which is that everybody involved has the responsibility to respect the rights of the individuals involved, and anybody who is not respecting the rights of the individuals involved should bear some responsibility. and that the fundamental building block for analysing whether the rights of individuals are being respected, because if we live in a society which is based on the rule of law and the respect of rights, then you need to be able to identify in the first instance what those rights are. And these are human rights and digital humanism rights. And every person involved, and I include legal persons, should act in accordance with the proper respect for those rights. Therefore, if you take that rights-based approach, each of the participants involved has its own responsibilities. Il faut assumer ses responsabilités, as they say in French. Everybody needs to take their own responsibilities and act in accordance with the law and these underlying principles. And so the apportionment, the answer to your question, therefore, about who should bear responsibility, the answer is everybody. And how do you apportion it? Well, everybody must do what they can. If it is not within their power, then I think that they probably have it's difficult to say they have the obligation to do anything. But if it is within their power, they should be doing it. And this is a bit like the principle of effectiveness, which we find in community law, European community law, where every entity involved in administering a law has the obligation to act in a way which ensures that the law has effect and is not deprived of effect. So this means that the courts have to be open. People have to be able to come into the court. The principle that justice should be visible and transparent. So the reporting, all the mechanics and so forth of the legal system need to give their support to this. The ministries need to give their support. Quasi-governmental bodies should be required to act in a way which gives full effect to community law. It is not an excuse to say, well, I'm not the government, so I don't have to act in a way which ensures compliance with the law. So this very important principle of community law, formerly Article 5, now Article 10, I think, of the treaty, the European Union Treaty, requires effectively that, in practice, that everybody involved needs to give effect. And I would say that would be my starting point for the allocation of responsibilities, which is you don't allocate them, you do what you can.
But in such perspective, we know that we have a lot of challenge posed by AI and digital platforms, which are cross borders, basically. So, do you believe the current legal systems are equipped to address the ethical challenges that is posing the AI digital platforms in cross-border basis? And how, basically, I will put you two questions. How can cross-border collaborations enhance accountability for digital technologies?
It is essential that you try to start from an agreed basic set of principles. I think unless the basic principles are agreed, cross-border operations become much more difficult because you effectively have national boundaries which are set by legislative and legal norms. And that makes cross-border much more difficult. You only have to look at pre-Brexit and post-Brexit to see what difficulties that can cause. And so I would say that you need to begin from the basic building blocks of, say, the Declaration of Human Rights or the Development Principles at the United Nations level, which form the underlying principles on which things may be constructed in a consistent and coherent way. If, as soon as you start trying to impose a norm, which is only agreed in one jurisdiction, perhaps even in one area, inevitably that area where you're moving across the boundary, you have a discontinuity and a disconjunction of law and therefore of movement. And that can be movement of data, can be movement of people. But I think we are talking about the movement of data and the treatment of data across borders. And unless you're building your principles on generally agreed fundamental principles, you are going to have problems.
I understand, which takes me to the part we have, in one hand, the corporations. We have entities which are operating from abroad into a specific country. And for what you're saying is quite difficult, let's say, to put a cross-border collaborations which enhance accountability for digital technologies. Is this correct? So in such a case, in this area where digital systems can influence behavior, we can have we can hit someone in TikTok or in the other social networks, putting our avatar, for example. How individuals retain a sense of autonomy and control in such a case?
Yeah, for me, you've put your finger on the absolutely fundamental piece of this, which is that the list of human rights and the various declarations of human rights need to be reinterpreted in the light of digital life and the right to privacy and respect and these respect for private life and property need to be worked out in detail as to what they mean in the digital world. The principles are fine. You don't need new principles. But how they play out in the digital world is a fundamental thing. And I think one of the most important grey areas has been that different jurisdictions have a different approach to how these rights may be alienated or dealt with. And jurisdictions which are familiar with the concept of moral rights, which cannot be alienated, you think immediately of France, of course, which for me is the home of moral rights. Everybody knows that moral rights cannot be alienated, sold, contracted, dealt with. You can deal with, you can sell or make legal operations in relation to derivative rights, but not the fundamental personal right. And other jurisdictions which haven't got that legal history don't give the same fundamental importance to the moral right and regard all rights as potentially as things that you can deal with by contract, almost commercial rights. And so, as between the idea that certain rights are inalienable, which is I believe it's in the US Constitution, but other countries also have nevertheless operated in ways where these rights have been dealt with, can be sold or are presumed to be assigned, or various other techniques are used, so that the right of the individual to be consulted and to have autonomy is lost in that process. And for me, that is the fundamental issue that we're talking about, and that the respect for that fundamental right, personal, inalienable right, is the way that we will ensure through laws and principles and regulations that the digital world respects individual rights in the same way as the physical world.
So this is very interesting what you're saying about prioritizing individual rights, basically, but how you put in the balance individual rights and the collective well-being when regulating digital platforms in such a case?
Well, that balancing act has been carried out for hundreds of years by courts who have to balance what restrictions on individual rights are necessary in a civil society. That's always happened, and it will continue to happen. And there are mechanisms, there are cases, there are courts, there are processes. I think that the challenge is that obtaining acceptance from new participants in digital society or in civil society, that they are part of that process when they didn't necessarily intend to be, is more problematic. And we've recently seen a number of, every country in the world and every trade grouping in the world is legislating to deal with AI, data sovereignty, data protection, privacy, cross-border movements. There, you can see that hardly a month goes by without some new law, and some of them are really fundamental and important and changing everything. And so that is a work in progress. You can see it going on around you.
I think that in this respect, Chris, the world geographically and geopolitically is moving in different with different approach. Is very different. The approach we are having in Europe, and when we were having a conversation, you mentioned the Digital Decade Act in Europe versus other geographies in the world who are having a completely different approach in balancing act in between the collective and the individual rights. What can you comment us on that?
Well, I would comment on it by talking about some jurisdictions where I've been involved in the drafting and review of laws around digital identity and data protection. And there are a lot of societies in the world where contributing your data to the state is a voluntary act, and people don't necessarily do it unless they have trust. So and I have been working in creating regimes, legal regimes in which trust can be placed in nearly 20 jurisdictions now. And the driver for that is that if people do not trust the regime, then they will not entrust their data to it. They will stay off the radar. They will not be visible. They will not participate in civil society. They will not participate in any form of economic action because they do not trust the state with their data. And so what is it that creates trust? Well, it is respect for your autonomy and respect for your privacy and respect for your rights. And so when you're writing or reviewing the laws for a jurisdiction which is looking to create a digital identity regime, you have to make sure effectively that the underlying principles are ones that the individuals can consent to and would consent to and would not regard as taking away their rights.
That's a very... Now you mention a key subject, Chris, because precisely I brought in an essay that we are in the era of trust. And you are confirming what I was thinking, that basically this is going to be, let's say, the key driver of future business. We will be in the business of trust, basically. This is for what you're saying and you're confirming. Okay, so any single company basically will be able to operate digitally or make a business of it if individuals, consumers, citizens doesn't trust in their systems. So it's an interest for business, basically, to build systems that are trustable for for everybody, correct?
Exactly correct, yes. And taking it further to your cross-border question, the consent to cross-border movements, as we've seen through the Schrems cases in Europe, effectively recognitions of equivalence and similar are a declaration that there is trust in the jurisdiction to which the data is being sent, and that it can be trusted to respect these principles. And if that trust cannot be established, then the data cannot move. So that is what the Schrems cases are all about for me. It's about, is the destination jurisdiction one in which there is the appropriate degree of trust?
So we will have there a sort of balancing between the legal systems that can serve a digital conscience, which is the topic of our discussion, and the trust that is going to generate good business, basically. This is what you're saying.
Yes, I think so. It effectively, if data is going to travel, it needs a passport, and the passport says that you respect the bearer of this passport, because that's what it says inside. Certainly, I think most passports, that the bearer of this passport exists and is entitled to be respected. And so, when you send data internationally, you have a cross-border data transfer. The data is entitled, and the owners of the data are entitled to know that their data will be respected. And they have to be, in the end, it has to be to some degree trust-based. Although you can, if your trust has not been respected and your trust has been betrayed, then you have to have a remedy, which is the other part of the principle of effectiveness that I was talking about earlier. A right with no remedy is not a right.
So let us project ourselves in the future. We know what is it now, and I think you describe it extremely in a very interesting and interesting manner, which I think will give a lot of thinking to our audience. But what does the ideal legal framework look like to you in a world where innovation passes regulation, basically?
I think the most important element for me of an effective legal regime is that any responsibility should fall on somebody, and there should be no gaps in it. So that effectively you identify, it's a bit like product liability, which again, in the EU, you have to show either you manufactured it, in which case you have responsibility, or you imported it, in which case you have some responsibility, but the ultimate manufacturer has also responsibility. And so you can only shift responsibility away from you by giving it to somebody else. And the defense that, well, it's not me, I'm not responsible, is not sufficient. That for me is a fundamental part of a legal regime.
That's a very interesting argument, Chris, which rounds our conversation. So basically, this, I think, answers as well the question or the concern of many in the audience about too regulated regime will hinder innovation. And basically, what we are saying is, yes, we need this cross-border legal framework, but if the consumers doesn't trust you, you will not be in business, basically. This is, which is a very, very interesting outcome. So in a way, you are saying that in a sense, the market will self-regulate itself from this perspective, correct?
Provided the respect of the individual's right to choose is present, because you cannot have a market where consumers have no choice. The markets are determined by consumer choice. That's how they work. And so to say we will leave it to the market is fine, but that only works if consumers actually have real choice, which they can make. Otherwise, you say we'll leave it to the market, but consumers can't choose, then that's just a lie.
That's perfect. Chris, many thanks for being here. Maybe you would like to provide us with some closing remarks that you would like to convey to the audience. What message you would like to give them?
Well, the first is a very preliminary message, which is that the role of the GTWN is incredibly important, and it has my deepest support. And this kind of thinking, this kind of thought leadership which you are putting together, I think is really very valuable. And that the various contributions you've been collecting will make a significant difference, and I think these areas are the ones which need to be explored into the new age of digital communication and digital existence, and that without these discussions, nothing much useful will happen. It's essential that these discussions are had. Secondly, I think that the phrase digital humanism is the one that I like for what we're doing, and you and I discussed that in our conversation. We went to some extraordinary places in our discussions, which I loved. Humanism is effectively a means of creating meaning and sense to life without the need for kind of external structures. You can have external structures, but they're not fundamental to it. And I think that is what we are doing here. And I love the fact that we can look at it in that optic and say this is a means of making sense of a new world where the principles, I think we can all sort of come together around principles, but the structures need to be put together and assembled, and that's something which I know that you are doing and I love doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you very much for contributing to a better a more digital humanistic society, Chris. It was an honor and a pleasure to have you here. And I'm sure that our audience will enjoy this, in a way, provocative podcast and discussion we have right now. And for the audience, I give you another appointment for our next chapters. And Chris, thank you so much. See you soon then.
It was an honor and a pleasure. Thank you, Victoria.
I want to thank our guest for joining today's episode of GTWN Now, and give a big thank you to our sponsors, CMS Global, for making this episode possible. Today's podcast will be available on our website, gtwn.org, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified when new episodes drop. I'm your host, Rosalie Gitau, GTWN International Board Member, wishing you a week of wonder.